Well, hello again, everyone. I guess it's been a while since I did a kind of serious video, or at least a video about a serious topic. And I've been having some thoughts lately about longevity. I guess part of it is having had a birthday a couple of months ago, and also I discovered I'm the last surviving member of my nuclear family since my twin brother died a few months ago. Did you know I had a twin brother? Well, anyway, earlier I talked about things besides just numerical statistics to define your overall health. And in fact, I did a previous episode about what's the recommended daily allowance of fun. How do you quantify some of these? And, I think one of my frustrations with the healthcare system is the failure to acknowledge that I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to longevity that have nothing to do with your cholesterol or your blood pressure or any one of these other numbers that they seem to live by. And that topic where I did about the daily allowance of fun, it was a semi-humorous thing, but behind it is a real serious motive. The idea that there are so many factors that contribute to a life worth living. I know people who felt very depressed and their health wasn't really that bad, but they didn't live very long. They just weren't very happy people. And some of them were very close to me, and I'm really sorry to talk about that. It was a sad thing to see that there was nothing I could do to help them, and I thought of all these dimensions in their life that just seemed to go unfulfilled. And what do I mean by that? Which is a good question. And aside from a quotient of fun in your lives, some other things that I think, and this is personal opinion. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but things that I think contribute to longevity are having a sense of purpose. I've also found people who are the most grateful tend to live a little longer, or at least a little happier. People who live in a loving home. I made some notes here. People who live their lives authentically. They are who they are. They don't try to be somebody else. They don't try to live up to somebody else's expectations. You know, I think that's really important. I think it's an important way to live through life anyway. But anyway, and also people who seem to decide that they are happy in life. I don't know how to quantify that. Maybe it's a subject for another video. But people who really believe that life is good to them. I think that leads to another topic that is kind of central to this whole channel, really, and that's gratitude. People who are grateful for what they have and are appreciative of the life they lead. I think that contributes a lot to feeling kind of fulfilled and wanting to stick around for a while. You know, um, another thing that I think contributes to shortening life is a sense of loneliness and isolation, which another thing I've talked about here, and I think it's a very important topic, especially for people who get older and have reductions in mobility. Who do you know who fits that? They get cut off, and despite all this technology you have for connectivity, they feel more isolated than ever. My wife and I recently went to a new McDonald's that opened up nearby, and the whole thing was like virtually automated. There were like no people working there. It's kind of weird, and not an experience that I want to have again. It's like I get out of the house to go see other people. And somebody say hello and thank you for coming, and just not to interact with machines. I mean, you might as well stay home then, right? Here's another one. How about a ratio between optimism and pessimism? Although I've known some very pessimistic people who seem to live forever, so I'm not too sure about that one. you know. But I think just as a general principle, it's better to be optimistic than pessimistic. Um, oh yes, and here's another one that I think is important, and that is self-respect. I think if people hang on to their own self-respect, or at least appreciate the value of it, I think that's a motivating factor in living a healthier life. You know. I mean, the reality is none of us knows how much time we have left. I had a great grandfather who was a notorious alcoholic, and he was told in his 40s if he didn't quit drinking, he'd be dead in a year. And he didn't quit drinking, and he lived into his 80s. And on the other hand, I knew a guy in the neighborhood I lived where I was growing up who was in great health, and and had a good job and a really wonderful family. And he dropped out of a heart attack in the parking lot outside the YMCA at the age of 40. Really, really tragic. So, I mean, none of these are hard and fast formulas either way, but there's just some thoughts that I have about, having a fuller life. Maybe more life in your years than years in your life, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I think it's really an important topic. So, what do you think? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me hear from you. Okay, leave a comment, leave a like, tell your friends, send me an email, subscribe, please. Like to get the word out about this. And anyway, I will see you in the next full length video or dad joke or whatever I come up with. We'll see. All right. Thanks for watching.